So I don't know how many of you were fans way back in 1991 when it came out of Terminator 2. That was in my wheelhouse. I was in high school when that came out. The special effects were amazing. There's a powerful scene at the end of the movie. Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a cyborg, an emotionless cyborg, which is really in his wheelhouse as an actor, so it was perfect. But in the movie, he gets to know this boy, this teenage boy, John Connor, whose life he's tasked with saving. And at the end of the movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, the cyborg, realizes that it needs to destroy itself in order to save the future of humanity. And John bursts out in tears because this machine has been protecting him and saving his life, and he's come to love it. And the response from Arnold is, "I know now why you cry, but it's something I can never do." So he recognizes the difference between him as a machine and humanity. The Terminator understands why we cry. So why do we cry? If Arnold could figure it out in 1991, why do we cry? Well, we cry for a lot of reasons, right? We cry when we're in pain, right? You fall, you break your ankle, you may cry. Physical pain. We cry when we have emotional pain. We cry when we have spiritual pain. We cry because of death, because of loss, sorrow, but we also cry out of fear and regret. But oddly enough, do we not also cry for happiness and joy? And sometimes just when we're laughing so hard, we start crying. Why tears? What purpose do they serve? Well, there's a common factor in all of that is through all of those different occasions and reasons why we might cry. And that, of course, is emotional release. Crying lets us do more than otherwise. It's not just liquid leaking out of your eyes. It's your body saying, I need to do more than what I can do in this moment. More than just laugh, more than just my facial expression, more than just sometimes you might be shaking, right? Your body is doing things because the moment is too much. Too much of a good thing or too much of a bad thing. It's just too much. The situation and the circumstances are beyond what you normally can express. We cry because trying to hold all that in, as apparently real men are supposed to do, which is a bunch of poppycock, but whatever, that's far from healthy, trying to hold it back. We cry because we're overwhelmed. And being overwhelmed is a part of being a human, of living in this world. It's only natural that things in life get to us. So let's take a look at Luke chapter 22, and we'll find out why Peter had bitter tears this episode. So this picks up right off where we left. We read in Mark, and then we read in Matthew this morning. They both led into this. Everyone has fled. Jesus is the only one left in the Garden of Gethsemane. It starts with verse 54. Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. That's a picture from the house of the high priest where it was in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. There's a church on this spot now, but the ruins of that house are underneath the church. And so you can see the Garden of Gethsemane on the hills over there. You see the yellow there at the Dome of the Rock. That's where the temple was. They brought him across the Kidron Valley to the southern part of the old city. This armed mob, sent by the Sanhedrin and guided by Judas the betrayer, has now arrested Jesus and brought him to the home of the high priest back in Jerusalem. With the Passover at hand, remember this is late Thursday, and the need to get Roman approval for any execution, the clock is ticking, and they're well aware of that. If we're going to pull this off and get rid of Jesus before the Passover, we've got to hurry, because if we delay and we hold him this weekend through the Passover and through the feast to follow, we may end up with a riot on our hands. So they're trying to do this quickly. So Jesus will be tried overnight, and it's not going to be an episode of Law and Order. There will be no legal protections, no real legal procedures. The law of Moses says you must have this, you must have that in order to try a capital offense, and they will bend and break those rules willy-nilly because necessity is driving them. Before we arrived at this moment, the 11 apostles and whoever else may have been tagging along to the Garden of Gethsemane, they have all fled into the night to escape arrest. We know virtually nothing about their whereabouts and their actions between that moment on Thursday evening when they flee the garden to when we find them again, hiding together behind locked doors on Easter Sunday morning. We see John at the foot of the cross, and then this other episode right here. That's about all we know. So it's quite the mystery what they were going through. But we know this: Peter followed at a distance. All four Gospels tell us that the de facto leader of the apostles, the man known as Simon Peter, decided to follow along to see what would happen to Jesus. John's account in the Gospel of John tells us that he too was there, that he was able to go inside the home to see firsthand because he had a family connection. He was somehow related to the family of the high priest. But Peter has no such connection, and he needs to be cautious. Why are you here, Peter? What are you doing? Curiosity, of course, but what else? Jesus had told Peter that his loyalty would lead to denial, that he could not stand with Jesus. And Peter had responded to that with a protest. No, I will die alongside you. Even if everyone else flees, I will not. So is it pride that made Peter follow? He initially ran, everyone ran, but at some point he turned around and in the darkness followed where he would be unseen. What brought him back? Was it loyalty? Probably. Love? Probably. Also pride seems to be an answer. I don't want to be the guy that ran away. Is Peter trying to prove himself to Jesus? Or is he not even thinking? Is he just acting and not even remembering Jesus' warning at this moment? I ask those questions because our emotional and our mental state is a mixture of things. It's attitudes, it's beliefs, it's motivations, all rolled up into one that gets us doing what we do. And whatever that combination was for Peter, however much of it was a noble motivation or an ignoble one if it was pride, he is here, and he wants to witness the outcome of this trial. We're told when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together. So the nights in Jerusalem's a fairly warm place, but the nights in the spring are cold. It gets cold when the sun goes down. And these soldiers, these servants, they've been told, wait outside. Right? They're not important enough to be inside where it's warm. They're sitting out here, and they have no idea how many hours they're going to have to wait. So they do what soldiers do. They get comfortable. They try to make the best of it. They light a fire while they sit through the middle of the night. That's rough duty. They don't want to be here. And they sit and chew the fat around the fire. They talk. Peter sat down with them. What are you doing, Peter? What is it that you think you're doing? Now, avoiding the cold is not worth the risk, right? You can blow on your hands, you can walk around. It's not just because he needs to warm up. It's not that cold. Maybe Peter feels, I have to get closer. If I'm going to hear, if I'm going to know what's going on, if I'm going to have a chance to do something, who knows what? I've got to be closer. If he stays out of the light, if he stays at a distance, that's very low risk but very low reward. What can he possibly accomplish there? Joining them in the courtyard means higher risk for a potential higher reward. And here comes the risk. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." Whatever the odds were of being recognized, Peter's already lost his gamble. Peter had been traveling with Jesus for years. He was a prominent person in Jesus' followers. He has been publicly known. A good number of people would recognize him, including, as it turns out, an ordinary servant girl. So what now? Right? Peter has a variety of options, one of which is, my sandals are tied, how fast do I run, right? Peter could just jump up and run. But he's going to have to decide, and he's going to have to decide quickly under pressure what his response will be. But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. What would have happened if Peter simply told the truth? "Yeah, I'm with him. He's my rabbi. I just want to know what's happening. I'm not causing any trouble. I just want to listen. I want to hear." What would have happened? Maybe they would have said, maybe they didn't care. Maybe they would have said, "Get out of here, get lost." Maybe they would have started harassing him. Maybe they would have arrested him, grabbed him, thrown him into the dungeon. Maybe he would have ultimately ended up on a cross next to Jesus. Peter couldn't know. He could not have known how severe the consequences would be for telling the truth. They were likely to be unpleasant, but he didn't know. You see, the moral and righteous path is the proper one, no matter the cost or the reward it may bring. We know this. We know that the right thing is the right thing, whether it costs us or not. But we live in a world where sometimes evil is celebrated and righteousness is persecuted. So it's not unusual for people who know what is right to still weigh the consequences. What will this cost? Or at least the consequences as I believe them to be, or fear them to be, or hope them to be. Whether we're accurate or not, we weigh them. What will the right thing cost, we say, before acting on it? Well, in that moment at least, Peter chose expediency over honesty. It might have ended there, right? It could have just been a footnote to the story of the Passion of Jesus, something we don't even really talk about. But it turned out to be the first episode, the first concrete step toward Peter's impending bitter tears. And that is often the case. The road to self-destruction always starts somewhere. A choice, a decision, a word, an action. That first step doesn't necessarily come with a warning sign that says, if you continue, look where you're going to end up. So what happens next? A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You are also one of them." Pause for a minute. Notice how this starts. A little while later. That tells us that Peter had time to think about the situation. She recognized me. Now what's next? He could have left rather than face the possibility of being asked the question again. He could have said, "This is too much." He could have walked away. But something kept him here, in spite of the danger of being asked again if he was with Jesus. There's a lesson in this, isn't it? Peter was playing with fire, as we call it. He was toying with temptation. He's pushing his luck, and it is not working. "Man, I am not," Peter replied. 0 for 2 at this point. The first one was bad, right? But Peter might have made the excuse, I was caught off guard, I panicked. Making excuses for your sins is a bad sign, But circumstances matter, and faithful people who are trying to live righteously are going to, from time to time, screw up and fail. Especially when the combination of factors, the circumstances, and the way it unfolds makes an ordinary temptation suddenly a brutal one. So maybe we could say, call that a mulligan, Peter. That was the first one. Peter's not caught unaware the second time he's accused. Problem is, in the intervening time, 15 minutes, whatever it was, Peter hasn't come up with a better answer to that question than the one he gave the first time. And he chose to stay. So for the second time, he denies his connection to Jesus. We have a number of idioms in the English language for moments like this. You'll recognize them. When push comes to shove. When the rubber meets the road. The proof is in the pudding. That's an English one. They got weird pudding in England. Peter is failing, right? He is stumbling. He is tripping. My daughter loves America's Funniest Home Videos. It's on Disney+. They're, some of them are quite old. You see that coming, right? It's on America's Funniest Home Videos. You know when the person is zooming down this hill or trying to ride this bike down this, you know how it's going to end. It's just a question of how badly this person was hurt. Now, because it's on America's Funniest Home Videos, you assume they were not paralyzed or killed, because that's pretty morbid of their family to send the video in. So you assume they walked away, but you're saying this will not end well, right? That's what's happening to Peter here. How badly will he be hurt when he comes crashing to the ground? He is flailing, his arms are waving, and you go, oh, that's going to hurt. It's coming. About an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, for he's a Galilean. We've probably all heard that explanation. He was betrayed by his accent. There's enough of an accent difference between Galilee and Judea that they're like, you're not from around here. I don't know if he said Ewans or what. I don't know what it was that Peter said that gave him up, but it was obvious. But it was an hour later, after the second failure, Peter could have admitted, right? This is too much for me. I cannot do this. I need to walk away. He could have recognized, I can't do any good here. I'm not helping the situation. I'm only a hindrance. He could have cut his losses and gone away with a hard lesson. But he stayed. We don't know why. Perhaps it's a case of the sunk cost fallacy. If you know economics, you know the sunk cost fallacy. I'll explain it. Maybe that's what was happening in his mind. It's the economic equivalent of in for a penny, in for a pound, which is also another one of those idioms. That's the behavior that causes people to throw good money after bad and cling to false hope. You're putting money into this family business and it's not working, but you say to yourself, look how hard we've worked up until now. If we close now, we'll have done it all in vain. And so you put the house up, and so you cash in your retirement savings, and people fight and get in deeper and deeper, but they won't let go because of how much they've already paid, how much they've already lost, how much they've already sacrificed. By the way, this happens to NFL teams all the time during free agency and the draft. The sunk cost fallacy, you can figure out how that works right now. Ignoring that is how, by the way, the Steelers got their new quarterback for a 6th-round pick, because Chicago said, we are cutting our losses and not holding on anymore. I don't know if it's going to work out for the Steelers with either one of the new ones, but that's that kind of thinking. Perhaps Peter held his ground because he does not want to admit to himself, I have betrayed Jesus twice and I have nothing to show for it. If I hold on until this trial ends, maybe I can do something. Maybe I can learn something that will allow me to justify the mistakes that I've already made. But unfortunately, that's the same kind of thinking that keeps people in abusive relationships long after they should have left. I need to make my suffering matter. It can't be for nothing. And that is self-destructive thinking. It does not work, and it won't work for Peter. And so now we have a third temptation, a third threat to his freedom, maybe even his life. And how will he respond? Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Luke spares us the escalation of this denial. Matthew and Mark tell us that he swore an oath. He said something to the effect of, "May God strike me dead if I lie." He added an oath. But even without that damning detail, the damage is done. Peter, the one who earlier in the gospel confessed, "You are the Christ, the Son of God." The one who went up on the mountain of the transfiguration, the one who went out on the boat to walk on the water to Jesus, that same Peter. He was always in the front, always answering the tough questions. Now, Peter is 0 for 3. And his opportunities to claim his allegiance to Jesus have all evaporated. This is a monumental failure, and it was avoidable from the beginning and at multiple steps along the way. For many of our failures, when we screw up in life, the judgment isn't instantaneous. Unlike Peter, we do the sin, we do what is wrong, and there's no bell, no alarm that goes off to tell everyone, "Look what you just did." For some of us, at least some of the time, that delay creates a false sense, I got away with it. Nobody saw, nobody knows. But of course we haven't, any more than Peter did. He just heard the rooster crow right then and there. And here is the gut punch. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. So if you're an actor, right, you've got the beard, you're playing Jesus in this scene, what look do you give? What are you trying to convey with your eyes? What do we imagine that would be? It's not the look of, "I told you so," whatever that look is. That's not Jesus. And it's not going to be anger or scorn. That's not him either. What I think that we'd expect to see in Jesus' eyes at this moment is a combination of pity and sorrow. Pity because none of this had to happen. Not to someone as ordinarily faithful and loyal as Peter. And sorrow because Jesus knows the enormity of what Peter has done. And it is about to come crashing down on Peter like an avalanche, and Jesus knows it. And he can't shield Peter from the pain that's coming. Can't stop it. Jesus knows, I'm going to pick him up. I'm going to restore him some days later. But until then, Peter is going to have this mountain of regret and guilt on his shoulders. I think that's what Jesus' look conveyed. We know on Sunday morning, Peter will run to the empty tomb because he wants to believe Jesus is alive. That action will remind us that it's not Peter's faith in Jesus that has broken this evening. It's himself that he's lost faith in. Peter lost faith in himself. That's why Jesus will restore him with a request repeated 3 times. Feed my sheep, tend to my sheep, care for my sheep. Perhaps it may help us in our struggles to overcome temptation when we face the temptation to sin in life. If we act as if Jesus were right here looking on? Would we do all the same things that we do? I know you're on your best behavior when your mother is watching, right? That's a classic line. If mom is watching, I'm on my best behavior. And for most of us, that perpetuated itself even into our adulthood, right? You might be 40, and if your mom is watching, you sit up straighter, you eat your vegetables, you watch your mouth, whatever it is. You don't make fun of your sister, whatever the thing was. We would do well to remember that nothing is hidden from God's sight. Jesus is always looking. And here is how it ends. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him before the rooster crows today. You will disown me 3 times. He remembers. That doesn't mean that he had previously forgotten. It means he simply understands and accepts what Jesus had told him. Previous to this, right, he was in denial about it. Up until this moment, Peter acted as if I am an exception to the rule. Yes, I know Jesus said it, but he doesn't know me. It won't come true, not for me. But it just did. All of it. 3 times he had chosen to deny Jesus. Twice he had failed to withdraw from the situation after publicly distancing himself from Jesus. I guess this is the idiom message. I got a bunch of them today. For this we would say the horse is out of the barn. A little too late to shut the door now, right? The milk is spilt. No sense crying, ironically. Or the biscuits are already burned. It's too late. Too late now, Peter. The test came and he failed it. He shouldn't have sat down to try to take this test. Failure was inevitable. But once he did, now he's going to deal with the consequences. And they are famously this: he went outside and wept bitterly. So why is Peter crying? Well, it's not physical pain and it's not fear. He prevented both of those things by lying. Peter's tears, his bitter tears, are sorrow, shame, and regret spilling out of him. He's weeping because the man he thought himself to be was nowhere to be seen this night. Replaced by somebody that Peter imagined, I never could be that guy, let alone would be him. His pride, his confidence, his self-worth are shattered in little pieces on the ground. Few things hurt us as deeply emotionally as realizing that you are not who you hoped to be. One way or another, I am far short of being the person I thought I was. Oh, that hurts. Many, if not most of us, have been in this moment at some point, with our failure overwhelming us. We've looked in the mirror and been disgusted by the person looking back at us. We're at rock bottom. How did we get here to this point in the story? What caused these bitter tears? We don't know Peter's thought process, why he stuck to the original plan to follow Jesus even after it started to fall apart, but we've got some lessons to learn here. Number one, Peter caused his own bitter tears. There's nobody else to blame. It's part of the reasons why he's feeling this way. Number two, it may have been folly or arrogance to remain after the first denial and the second denial. This night Peter acted like a fool. And thirdly, in the end, Peter's tears were flowing so powerfully because he loved Jesus so deeply. He believed in him so totally, which is why this night's failure was such a blow to him. In addition to losing faith in himself, Peter realized that he's disappointed his mentor, his hero, his Lord, and his friend. So that's a real downer. What are we going to learn from this? Well, number one, like Peter, our journey into temptation and sin often advances one step at a time. Smart man would say, stop after the first step or the second step. Stop somewhere. Secondly, which means that we, like Peter, may have multiple opportunities to reject that temptation, but also greater bitterness if we still fail, despite the fact that we had chances. But I want to leave us with this. Failure is not the end. It wasn't for Peter, and it won't be for us. We can repent, trust in God, reject sin, and embrace righteousness the next time.